Rune is being tortured inside a dungeon. The man torturing him seems to enjoy every moment of it, commenting on how interesting it is that the trash son of House Sermon, despite being born without any talent, is surprisingly sturdy. Rune continues enduring the pain as his skin burns alongside the other injuries covering his body. The man, sans Parton, eventually tells Ryan that he has grown bored. He honestly believed he could gain something from Ryan, even though he was considered the trash of the Sermon family. Still, Sans warns him not to die just yet. Today marks the 3rd anniversary of the day. He, the Lord of Parton, destroyed the Sermon family. After Sans leaves, Ryan thinks about his words and realizes that 3 years have already passed since his family was destroyed. The Sermon family is the strongest and most powerful house on the continent, one of the 5 great houses. Their reputation is built on the fact that they are the ones who mainly take on the responsibility of killing demons and monsters from the Dark Zone. Being number 1, it is only natural for the other houses to want to bring them down. So, when the Sermon family began to decline, the Parton family, who were considered second in strength, did not waste the opportunity to crush them. Their reason was not revenge or anything personal. What they truly wanted was the blessing of the Sermon bloodline. Just like the Ragnard family, Ryan's family possesses the blood of dragons flowing through their veins. A direct descendant of the family can become a 7th circle mage before the age of 10 and a swordmaster before the age of 15. Rune never received this privilege because he was talentless, or because he was truly trash. He was cursed by the Demon King Arkan. According to the curse, once every few centuries, someone from the Sermon family is destined to suffer from it. In other words, Bro wasn't nerfed. He was banned from becoming strong for life because of this curse. Ryan could never become a swordmaster or a mage. If only he had been strong, the Parton family would never have dared to challenge the Sermons. However, there is no point in regretting the past anymore. At last, Ryan feels his consciousness beginning to slip away the moment he closes his eyes. The scene shifts to a different perspective in another timeline. This time, Ryan is definitely strong. He is currently fighting monsters, single-handedly cutting through entire hordes of them. The battle continues until he encounters someone. A fight begins between the two, but this time, Ryun tastes defeat. Instead of finishing him off, his enemy grants him his deepest desire. And so, Ryun slowly awakens to the sound of someone panicking. The girl sitting in front of him is his personal maid, Colin. The moment she realizes he is finally awake, relief washes over her face. Normally, Ryun would be surprised to see her, and immediately notice how young she looks to confirm his suspicion. He asks her to bring him a mirror. When Ryun sees his reflection, his suspicion is confirmed. Still curious, Colin is surprised when he asks her about the date. The moment Ryun learns that the year is 1892, he freezes. He has returned to the time when he was 12 years old. That means the Parton family must be plotting to destroy the Sermon family while they are in decline. Rune thinks about the final boss he faced and realizes that the man really did send him back to the past, to his previous life. Just as he begins to come to terms with this fact, someone enters the room. The man notes that his young master is finally awake and immediately expresses his concern. This man happens to be Alejandro, the knight commander of the Sermon family. Seeing Ryun's condition, Alejandro suggests that he skip training for the day. However, his suggestion is met with a firm rejection. Both Colin and Alejandro are taken by surprise by Ryun's blunt response. Ryun reassures them that he is completely fine, but the two of them are shocked once again when Ryun takes the initiative and asks about the day's training. Alejandro is still reeling from disbelief, but he eventually tells Ryun that they are scheduled to practice longsword footwork. Hearing this, Ryun grabs his wooden sword. He confidently tells his instructor to skip the footwork training because they are going straight to the main event, monster hunting. Ryun still doesn't fully understand why he has regressed, but one thing is certain, this is his opportunity to get revenge. While preparing for training, Ryun checks his system window. The site confirms what he already suspects. He really has regressed to his previous life after returning from another world. In that previous life, Ryun was a hunter and a player who spent his days killing monsters. With this, he is currently the only person on the entire continent who possesses a system. That alone gives him an unfair advantage over everyone else. Just then, Alejandro enters the room and informs him that the preparations are complete. The scene soon shifts to the training ground. Waiting for Ryan is his opponent, a goblin. The monster is chained in place, but its savage eyes make it clear that it would gladly kill Ryan if given the chance. Ryan stands his ground. However, the training session hasn't even properly begun when Colin starts freaking out. She immediately asks Alejandro why he arranged a goblin for Ryan to fight when the young master fainted just yesterday from merely looking at one. Ryan can't deny that she has a point, but he is no longer the same 12-year-old boy from before. He also begins to understand why his former self fainted and couldn't even face a goblin. His system suddenly flashes a warning. Due to the Demon King's curse, his fear naturally increases whenever he faces a monster. Rune studies the debuff and realizes something. He never even knew this was one of the curse's effects. Seeing Rune remain frozen in place for so long, Alejandro misunderstands the situation. He assumes fear has completely paralyzed the boy and suggests stopping the training for today. But Ryun refuses. He makes his move. Unfortunately, the moment the goblin reacts, Ryun immediately folds, trying to regain his composure. He forces himself to remain calm. This feeling is nothing compared to what he once experienced. Ryun is thinking about the demon he faced in another world, the monster that gave him a first-class regression ticket. Compared to that thing, this goblin is nothing. After gathering his courage, Ryun finally swings his sword with renewed determination. The blow lands directly on the goblin's head. Both Alejandro and Colin are stunned. Colin, in particular, looks like she might faint from sheer concern. At that moment, Ryun's system informs him that the Demon King Arkan's curse has been reduced. Looking at his damaged wooden sword, Ryun receives another notification. He is no longer suffering from monster phobia. However, something tells us that Ryun isn't finished yet. Predictably, he drops the wooden sword and asks Alejandro to hand him a real weapon. At this point, poor Colin's soul is practically ascending, but the Knight Commander complies without the slightest hesitation. As Alejandro watches Ryun, he notices how different his young master has become, and deep down he is grateful. In his eyes, today is the day his young master finally becomes a man. The goblin that looked so fierce moments ago is now the one trembling in fear. As for Ryun, his eyes burn with confidence and a thirst for revenge. He swings the sword, the blade cuts through the goblin, killing it on the spot. Meanwhile, although Alejandro acknowledges that the Sermon family is currently in decline, he tells Colin to watch closely. He firmly believes that Ryun will become the next head of the Sermon family. Later, back in his room after training, Ryun reflects on his status window, the system's assistance, and the way he managed to overcome his curse. This confirms that he still possesses the potential to grow. However, Ryun isn't exactly happy with what he sees. The system rewards him with experience for killing the goblin. But if he wants to reach the level of strength he possessed as a player in the other world, he will need to kill thousands, if not tens of thousands of goblins. And with the Sermon family already in decline, time is a luxury he doesn't have. Ryun needs to find a way to regain the level of power he possessed in his previous life. The reason behind the Sermon family's decline is simple. Ryun's father and older brother suddenly disappeared 2 years ago. Although the Sermon family still holds the position of the strongest house on the continent, that won't last forever. Soon, the Parton family will begin making their move. After thinking for some time, Ryun finally discovers another way to level up. But this method requires the assistance of a certain woman. Later, Ryun meets with her alone in a room. The woman immediately comments on hearing that he killed a goblin. Even so, she still can't understand why Ryun summoned her for magic training. Like Alejandro, Ryun explains that Sena, the woman sitting before him, is the leader of the Sermon family's mage division. She is just as powerful as the family's knight commander. However, unlike Alejandro, Sena is a mage and one of the few people on the entire continent to reach the 7th circle. Sena doesn't prolong the discussion. She reminds Ryun that she has already confirmed that he cannot wield magic. He simply lacks the talent. So from her perspective, it makes no sense for him to suddenly show interest in magic. Ryun remains composed. He already knows this. In his previous life, he gave up on magic because the curse robbed him of his talent in both magic and swordsmanship. However, that was yesterday, back when he was feeling like a defeated child. So, Ryun looks at Sena and asks her a simple question. What would happen if he could feel mana? The question immediately catches her off guard. Sena decides to test Ryun's unbelievable claim that he can see mana. Using her immense 7th circle magic, she creates a glowing image made entirely of mana in front of him and asks him to identify it. Without hesitation, Ryun calmly answers that it is a red dragon. Sena is completely caught off guard. Acting clueless, Ryun asks if he got the answer wrong, but she immediately tells him that he is correct. She cannot understand how he managed to see through her mana illusion. She had intentionally hidden the real image behind a fake layer, yet Ryun saw through it without the slightest difficulty. As she paces around the room, Sena wonders about Ryun's sudden transformation. However, none of it makes sense to her, especially considering his curse. Shifting back to the main topic, Ryun reveals the real problem. He admits that although he can sense mana, he cannot retain or use it. His family's cultivation method is completely useless to him and simply does not work with his body. Once again, Sena is caught by surprise. Ryun explains that mana cultivation is the fastest way for him to grow stronger, which is why he summoned her in the first place. After understanding the situation, Sena explains that helping him cultivate mana means pouring her own mana directly into his body. The process is no different from placing his life in her hands. Ryun remains completely calm after hearing this. Despite the danger, Sena is caught off guard when he even makes a joke about it, pointing out that he is already weak and cannot resist her anyway. However, in Ryun's mind, the truth is simple. She is the only person he can trust. Back when the Parton family made their move and attacked, Sena remained by his side. Even after exhausting all her mana and pushing her body to its limit, she continued protecting him. Remembering this, Ryun extends his hand, showing that he has made his decision. She is the only person he can trust with this. The two of them begin the process immediately. Ryun kneels with his shirt removed as Sena announces the start of the session. As she prepares, she remembers how she just finished explaining the secret of his family's blue earth cultivation method. Ryun wants to try it immediately, What she does not know is that Ryun is already familiar with the method. He used it back in Adion when he was still a player. Sena tells him to focus as she prepares to channel her mana. She warns him that the pain will be unbearable, so he must not struggle or scream. If he reaches the point where he can no longer endure it, he only needs to think about stopping, and she will immediately halt the process. The only thing Ryun hears is the word pain. That word brings back an unpleasant memory, the torture he endured inside the Parton family's dungeon. Compared to what he experienced there, Ryun believes he can handle this. So, he tells Sena that he trusts her. In other words, she should not hold back. With that, Sena channels her mana with full force. Ryun immediately feels the effect as the powerful energy courses violently throughout his body. Unfortunately, his system window soon reveals the problem. His curse is reacting. As a result, the mana entering his body is immediately expelled. Sena notices this and explains that she expected such a reaction. Ryun's father had already informed her about the curse, but she refuses to give up. She pours even more mana into his body. Despite her efforts, the curse continues to react. Seeing this, Ryan realizes that the outcome is exactly what he expected. Even a legendary archmage cannot overcome a high-tier curse through brute force alone. Still, Ryan reminds himself that he has used this method of training before. Back when he was a player in Adion, he discovered a way to control mana despite the curse. He would allow the curse to react and scatter the mana. Then at that exact moment, he would forcefully trap the energy inside his body. By doing this, he could trick the curse and retain the mana at the same time. Meanwhile, Sena is completely shocked. The young master is actually controlling the mana inside his body. Several notifications appear in front of Ryun, showing that the curse is activated while he is simultaneously resisting it. The process is incredibly painful. Ryun feels as if his body and blood vessels are on fire, but he refuses to lose. He has faced far worse dangers and endured far greater difficulties in the other world as a player. Not to mention, he was known as a master player in that world. No one understood mana better than him. Although he has returned to his younger body, his soul still remembers everything. As for Archon, the so-called demon king who cursed him, Ryun has never actually seen him. But compared to the final boss he faced in Adion, a demon king who had reached the level of a god, Archon was not even worth mentioning. And just as Ryun successfully cultivates mana, Sena notices it as well. However, the process places an enormous strain on his body, causing him to collapse. Sena immediately becomes concerned. Meanwhile, Ryun thinks to himself that it still hurts like hell. He feels as if he is about to lose consciousness. Yet strangely, he feels nothing. His mind returns to the pain he endured during the torture and experiments inside the Parton family's dungeon. Then, he remembers someone coming to save him. That person was Alejandro. He had come to save Ryun and apologized for arriving late. Ryun could only stare at him. The man had not abandoned him. Alejandro could only apologize and ask for forgiveness before dying not long after. The memory causes Ryun to break down in tears, but at that moment, his eyes suddenly open. Ryun realizes that he has been crying in his sleep. He looks at himself in confusion. The mana cultivation has succeeded, so why was he crying when he should be happy? This time, Ryan makes a vow. He will not lose anything anymore because now he finally has the power to fight back. Rune activates his mana while plotting his next move. For his revenge plan to succeed, he cannot allow anyone, especially the Parton family, to suspect him or discover his true strength. However, instead of following the usual path of secretly growing stronger before eventually wiping out the Partons, Ryan has a different plan. He intends to grow stronger while making the Sermon family appear to be collapsing even faster. That way, the Partons will be forced to make their move much sooner. So, the very next day, our protagonist scratches his head and casually comments that his mana cultivation has failed. Both Alejandro and Sena are left speechless. The room falls completely silent. Rune knows that anyone would be irritated, if not outright furious, by his actions. However, he has to keep his strength a secret, even from the two people he trusts the most. To make the act more convincing, he suggests that Sena check for any trace of mana inside his body. She has no idea why our protagonist insists on hiding something everyone already knows about. Still, she casts a spell to detect the mana within his body. The result leaves her stunned. Sena is completely disbelief-stricken, while Ryan simply smirks. As a master player of Adion, concealing his mana is child's play. Meanwhile, Sena is almost in tears. Just the previous day, she personally sensed the mana within his body. Now it has completely vanished. Without saying another word, she leaves the room and slams the door shut behind her. Despite the setback, Alejandro strongly insists that our protagonist dedicate himself to training. Even if he lacks talent as a mage, he has already shown great promise in swordsmanship. That is when Ryan drops another bombshell. He tells the old man that fighting the goblin was terrifying, and that he does not think he has the motivation to continue. And just like that, the old man's hopes are shattered once again. The story then skips ahead 2 months. Colin has just come out of Ryan's room, reflecting on how our protagonist has not left his room once during these past 2 months. During this time, Ryun's mother has been the only one handling the affairs of the estate, and she is now beginning to show signs of reaching her limits. Naturally, the workers around the estate have started talking about our protagonist's closed-door seclusion. Many openly express their disappointment. especially after Ryun had raised everyone's hopes by killing a goblin. One of the maids casually mentions that people are rumored to die whenever they suddenly change. Colin immediately shuts down the idea and begins defending Ryun. However, a male servant suddenly refers to Ryun as the omen of the Sermon family. He explains that the problem is not limited to the Sermon family. Outsiders and members of other noble families have also begun labeling Ryun as the trash of the Sermon family. Colin admits that she never expected people to be so harsh. The male servant explains that it is only natural for people to become heavily disappointed when their expectations are high. Not to mention, the once powerful Sermon family is already in decline. Even the servants and workers in the estate have begun quitting. When Colin is asked what she plans to do, she falls silent. Meanwhile, on the other side of the estate, Ryun takes a bite of his meal and immediately notices that the quality has dropped. Of course, the little psycho simply smiles. His plan is slowly progressing. Ryun explains that it is not as though he cannot prevent the family from declining. He could easily use the memories from his previous life to stop it from happening. However, what he wants is for the Parton family to attack. That would give him both the perfect reason and the perfect opportunity to wipe them out. At this point in time, the decline of the Sermon family began after Ryun's father and older brother disappeared alongside the search party sent to find them. This left the family without the means or resources to send another search party. The training ground within the mansion, which was once bustling with activity, is now filled with unskilled knights and servants who have little willingness to work. Even retainers from other noble houses who would normally visit to meet the next head of the family take one look at the situation and immediately turn around. Thanks to that, Ryun can act freely inside his room without any distractions. Still, he admits that the speed of his plan is too slow. He explains that a wealthy family can survive for 3 generations after going bankrupt, so Ryan begins wondering if he should do something about it. But at that moment, Colin suddenly bursts into his room. Her eyes sparkle with excitement as she informs him that it is time to train with the Knight Commander. Ryun immediately panics. Using the bedsheet to hide himself, he makes an excuse and tries to avoid going. But to his surprise, Colin suddenly acts like someone possessed. Ryun is taken aback as she literally begins taking matters into her own hands. After all, she has been bonded with Ryun since he was a baby and has never had any intention of leaving the Sermon family. Eventually, Ryun gears up and stands on the training ground with his sword in hand. Beside him, Alejandro continues giving him instructions and encouragement. Ryun can only think about how troublesome the entire situation is. He does not need this kind of attention. Still, he admits that a part of him desperately wants to help. However, he cannot let anyone know that he has been training every night using a skill he created in Aedeon. The skill in question is body control, a technique that hides his true strength and is especially useful for assassinations. The sole reason Ryan avoids training in public is that he has not fully mastered the skill yet. For now, Ryan simply holds his sword and does nothing. Yet, despite his lack of movement, the system continues rewarding him with experience. Several notifications appear showing that he is growing stronger. This causes Ryun to panic. Because of that, he immediately runs away while making another excuse. Naturally, Alejandro is annoyed by his behavior. Later, inside the restroom, Ryan realizes that he still cannot properly control the skill whenever he makes any violent movement. He then calls up his system window. The system reveals that he is currently at level 3 along with his current stats. However, what impresses him the most is that the Archon Curse is no longer ranked B. When he first returned, it had been ranked S. Ryun admits that his progress during the 3 months since his regression is not bad. He decides that once all of his stats reach 20, he will begin his next plan and start unlocking classes, just as he did in Aedeon. His priority is to unlock the Assassin and Necromancer classes. When he finally returns to the training ground, he finds Alejandro chatting with someone. The man turns out to be Truno Hilde, the Sermon family's general manager. He immediately greets his young master. However, Truno has not come simply to exchange greetings. He has arrived to deliver a message from the royal palace. Ryun reads the contents of the letter and immediately notices that this is different from his previous life. The letter turns out to be an invitation to the birthday party of Kyle Darren, the second prince of the Darren Kingdom. Ryun grins when he sees the invitation. This means he has finally found a way to speed up the collapse of his family. And more importantly, he may now be able to deal with the Parton family much sooner. The next chapter opens with Ryun's journey to the capital. Truno Hilde accompanies him inside the carriage and comments on how exhausted he looks. Ryun explains that Colin kept him awake all night trying on different outfits for the event. The hardest part, however, was convincing her not to come with him. The manager says he understands and adds that both Alejandro and Sena would normally have accompanied him. However, an unexpected large-scale monster horde suddenly appeared. Since the Sermon family is primarily responsible for monster subjugation, Alejandro has been deployed to the Dark Zone. As for Sena, she was summoned overseas by her mother, who is currently acting as the head of the Sermon family. Neither of those responsibilities could be refused, which is why Ryun, only 12 years old, is traveling alone with Truno. Noticing that our protagonist seems deep in thought, Truno reassures him that even in the capital, no one would dare make a move against the direct descendant of the Sermon family. Ryun does not share that confidence. In the past, sending a mere retainer would have been enough to represent the family. Now, with the Sermon household in decline, a direct descendant has to attend Prince Kyle Daron's birthday celebration personally. Even so, he cannot blame anyone else. After all, he is the one who created this situation. A while later, they finally arrive at Dararun, the capital of the Darren Kingdom. At the royal palace, everyone is already expecting our protagonist. The moment Ryun steps out of the carriage, Prince Kyle himself walks forward to welcome him. Truno immediately bows and says it is an honor to be invited, and personally welcomed by the prince. Meanwhile, our boy scoffs inwardly at the mention of a welcome. From the moment they entered the capital, he could feel the piercing gazes directed at his family's downfall, not to mention the gossiping nobles whispering behind his back and mocking him. Hearing every word, Ryun simply smiles. Pretending to be nervous, he greets everyone while deliberately stuttering. His general manager can only cover his face in embarrassment. Meanwhile, the laughter and ridicule continue. Deep inside, however, our protagonist smirks. Ryun calls them fools and claims he will eventually crush every last one of them. The next scene shifts to Ryun's attendants, discussing everything that has happened since they arrived. They came to the capital a full week before the prince's birthday. Normally, every noble would use this opportunity to socialize, strengthen relationships with other noble families, and mingle with their envoys. Not only did Ryun make a somewhat poor first impression when he greeted everyone upon arriving, but he has also remained secluded inside his room ever since, preventing his attendants from enjoying the pre-celebration festivities. And by festivities, they mean delicious food, fine drinks, and of course beautiful women. Just as they continue complaining, another attendant rushes into the room with good news. He reports that Ryun plans to attend tonight's banquet and wants his escort to prepare as well. Naturally, the men are thrilled to hear the announcement. Still, the messenger adds one more instruction. Ryun wants them to remain hidden until he makes his appearance. When someone suggests filing a report first, the others insist they forget about it for the time being. Without wasting another second, they rush toward the banquet hall while Ryun secretly watches them from a distance. It turns out he has not been idly hiding away these past few days. Instead, he has been training, and there is another reason he chose to attend tonight's banquet. The person he has been waiting for has finally arrived. That person is none other than Zan's Parton. The next scene takes us to the banquet as the young master of the Parton family is announced. The man of the hour confidently strolls into the hall as though he owns the entire event. Just then, he locks eyes with someone. Truno takes one look at him and prepares to leave. Unfortunately, Zan stops him and attempts to strike up a conversation. Truno remains polite toward the young noble. The very next moment, however, Zans changes his tone and begins mocking our boy. Hearing this, Truno calmly replies that everything Zans has heard is nothing more than rumor. Zans merely shakes his head. He claims to know that the Sermon family is in decline, and even believes Ryun is the reason behind it. Truno is stunned. Zan's Parton is considered a genius who reached the 5th circle at the tender age of 15. Even so, openly insulting both Ryun and the Sermon family in front of everyone is clearly crossing the line. Zans continues speaking. He pretends to believe the stories are only rumors and even suggests punishing those who spread slander about our protagonist. Meanwhile, Truno struggles to keep his anger under control. The bastard is calling our protagonist trash. Yet this is the same man who started drinking at the age of 7 and was already killing civilians within his family's territory by 13. In truth, he is the biggest scoundrel in the entire Darren Kingdom. Just as Truno is thinking this, our protagonist enters the banquet hall. He is announced as the Dragon of Daron. The declaration leaves Zan's Parton stunned. Truno is equally surprised to see his young master after he had remained inside his room for so long. Meanwhile, Ryun radiates total confidence as he starts aura farming right in the middle of the event. For someone known only as the rumored disgrace of the Sermon family, he effortlessly becomes the center of attention. Sans notices this immediately and hates every second of it. To him, Ryun has stolen the spotlight, reducing him to nothing more than background furniture. In the middle of his thoughts, our protagonist approaches and respectfully greets the man he intends to destroy. The moment Ryun mentions hearing so much about Zans from his older brother, Lars, the 4th son of the Sermon family, who mysteriously disappeared, Truno immediately grows uneasy. At the same time, the surrounding nobles begin doing what they do best. They gossip. As the whispers grow louder, Zans admits he has also heard plenty about Ryun. Upon hearing that, our protagonist casually brings up the days when Zans attended the academy. It turns out Zans is infamous for being a dropout, and he attended the academy during the same period as Ryun's older brother. Ryun even goes as far as praising Zans for his so-called achievements. He mentions hearing how Zans protected other students. Then, with an innocent expression, he adds that he also heard Zans once stopped a female student from being sexually harassed. By this point, Zans is practically fuming. Ryun is deliberately sugarcoating every incident, twisting them into compliments just to humiliate him in front of everyone. Our protagonist is about to deliver the final blow. Before he can finish, Truno immediately steps in, preventing Zans from suffering even further humiliation. With that, he grabs Ryun by the hand and makes an excuse to leave. Our protagonist follows Truno while wearing a wicked smirk. Meanwhile, Zanz burns with rage over the humiliation Ryun has inflicted upon him, sensing his fury. Our protagonist smiles inwardly. This anger is exactly the trigger he needs for the next stage of his plan. Later, Zanz is furious, smashing things around the room while swearing and cursing Ryun as a freaking bastard. He never expected Lars to know what happened to him at the academy. Zanz explains that he didn't quit the academy back then. He was kicked out. Even though his family had tried their best to keep the matter a secret, he still can't understand how the information leaked out. As for Ryan's final remark, which caused Truno to step in and stop him from saying anything more, Zanz admits that it was the worst period of his life. The incident was related to the time he tried to have his way with a female student, only for Ryan's older brother to step in and glare at him furiously. Zanz explains that he didn't know the girl was Ryan's older brother's lover. He had simply assumed she was a low-born commoner attending the academy. That statement only makes Lars even more furious. He points out that everyone is equal, whether they are nobles or commoners. Then, he drops the line that left Zanz completely humiliated. He tells the bastard to kneel and beg for the girl's mercy. Otherwise, he is ready to abandon the sermon name just to kill him, remembering how humiliated he felt back then. Zanz becomes so furious that he nearly tears his hair out. But after a moment, he decides he should stop focusing on Lars and turn his attention back to Ryun, because now something terrible is about to happen to him. The moment he says this, someone enters the room. Zanz Parton simply smirks when he sees the person who has come to suggest a secret meeting with him. That person happens to be Truno, our protagonist's very own general manager and chief butler. Before we find out about their meeting, the scene shifts to the end of the birthday banquet. Our boy is on his way home. Sitting inside the carriage, he reflects on his actions during the banquet. Everything he wanted has been achieved, and his plan is progressing smoothly. But to him, the most satisfying part is still the fact that he managed to rage bait Zanz Parton. Anyway, Truno suddenly begins praising his young master's actions during the banquet. He admits that Ryun's actions made him believe the hope of the Sermon family has not yet died. Ryun, however, asks what he is talking about. He points out that he didn't even socialize or form connections with any noble house. On the contrary, he made the House of Parton despise him. Even so, Truno still believes Ryun's actions towards Zanz were extremely satisfying. But at that moment, our protagonist suddenly looks like someone who has realized something without saying another word. He activates a soundproof barrier inside the carriage. Naturally, Truno is shocked by his sudden action. When he asks what his young master is doing, Ryan reminds him of his last remarks. Then, with a scoff and a grin, he reveals that he already knows about Truno's betrayal. Truno immediately breaks into a cold sweat. He tries to play dumb, but Ryun simply tells him that his crime is unforgivable. However, since his betrayal only helped accelerate Ryun's plan, our protagonist tells him that he is forgiven. Now, Truno is completely lost. Still, he lowers his head and asks how much his young master knows. Ryun simply replies that he knows a lot. In fact, he knows enough to believe that what happened wasn't entirely Truno's fault. He adds that he was planning to give Truno a second chance. But before that, he wants him to listen to his plan and decide for himself whether he deserves that chance. And just like that, Ryun lets Truno in on his grand plan. The more Truno listens, the more shocked he becomes. He can't help but ask how his young master even formulated something like this. The man covers his face before expressing the joy he feels, almost as if he wants to shout in triumph. Seeing this, Ryun smiles. To him, Truno's reaction means the man is on board with his plan. Meanwhile, Truno can't help but wonder if Ryan is really a 12-year-old. To him, Ryan isn't simply smiling. It is almost as if he is eagerly waiting for the moment he gets to kill someone. Just then, the carriage suddenly comes to a stop. One of the escort knights approaches the driver and asks why he stopped, telling him to keep moving. However, the knight is stunned by what he sees. The poor driver is dead, having been killed by a poisoned arrow, and another arrow is already flying toward the back of the knight's head. The knight manages to block it before warning everyone that they are under attack. As arrows begin to rain down on them, the knight orders everyone to prioritize protecting the carriage. Since the arrows contain mana, the knights quickly deploy a mana barrier. But in that instant, one of the knights suddenly notices something. He immediately calls for the captain. The carriage door is open, and that is when they realize it. Ryun is missing. It quickly becomes obvious that the attack was nothing more than a distraction. Now, the knights are left completely confused. Truno manages to use the distraction to escape. He rides at full speed on his horse, carrying Ryun, who is tightly bound with rope. Throughout the entire ride, our protagonist uses his system to unlock and activate his skills from Adian. He admits that he has a lot of buff skills he can cast on himself. More importantly, the guards who were supposed to protect him are now in an uproar. In his previous life, after the kidnapping incident, his younger sister, who became the last remaining direct descendant of the Sermon family, did everything in her power to find him using the family's remaining assets. That, in turn, led to the collapse of his family. But Ryun believes he can finally use this situation to his advantage. Back in the carriage, Truno had asked if his plan was really to fake the family's collapse and downfall. Ryun explained that the Sermon family was already declining. If he tried to rebuild it now, the other noble families might feel threatened, and in the worst-case scenario they could even form an alliance to crush them. Now it all made sense. This was why Ryun had deliberately appeared incompetent and spineless, making the nobles at the banquet lower their guard. Normally this move would buy the Sermon family some time, but Ryun was confident that despite this, the Parton family would still try to crush them. Knowing this, he decided to use it to his advantage. Truno finally realized that this was the reason his young master had made Xan's Parton furious. Even more shocking, Ryun explained that Xan's would definitely make his move once Ryun was removed from the capital. And what made his plan even better was the fact that Xan's Parton already had an inside man. With that, Ryun told Truno to make his decision. He could either aid in the destruction of the Sermon family or become one of the key figures who helped them rise back to power. Back in the present, Ryun continues unlocking skills with his system. Then Truno suddenly apologizes and asks for forgiveness. In response, Ryun reminds him to stick to the plan. Only that will earn his forgiveness. Meanwhile, our protagonist continues pushing himself. Finally, all of his stats reach 20 points. This means all the conditions have been met for him to unlock a class. And that makes Ryun smile. After some time, they finally arrive at their destination. Sans Parton and his men are already waiting for them. He explains that, given the nature of their deal, he came personally to deliver their agreement. When Xans begins insulting the Sermon family, Truno tells him to stop. This causes Xans Parton to mock him as a dog that bites its own master. He tells Truno to accept his reward quietly. The reward is information regarding Ryun's missing brothers. Xans Parton confidently states that the information has been thoroughly verified. Truno is naturally in disbelief, but Xans simply hands the information over while assuring him that it is 100% legitimate. Although the Parton family is famous for being a family of assassins, their main business is information trading, and because of that, they never sell false information. Overhearing everything and piecing the details together, Ryun finally understands why Truno betrayed him. According to him, Truno is simply selling the incompetent heir in order to find his older brothers, who have a much better chance of leading the Sermon family. Even if Truno knew that the Parton family possessed information about his brothers, he couldn't afford to buy it. The Partons could simply continue inflating the price until he was completely unable to pay. With that matter settled, Xans Parton tells Truno that he can leave. He even addresses him as a traitor. Still, Truno reminds him to keep his promise. Xans Parton promises that not a single injury will be inflicted on Ryun's body, but his expression betrays his true intentions. Once Truno departs, one of Xan's men asks if they should kill him. Xans tells them there is no need. The man is already a dead man. The reason is simple. Truno was the only person with Ryun when he disappeared. That alone makes him the main suspect. Xans grabs Ryun by the hair and explains that he needs Truno to return so he can begin his grand plan. Now, inside the Parton family's dungeon, Ryun slowly wakes up. Sans Parton immediately grabs him by the hair and remarks that the little bastard is finally awake. Our protagonist ignores him and looks around at the all-too-familiar surroundings. Then he asks what Xans is doing. In response, Xans asks if it isn't obvious. Ryun has been kidnapped. When Ryun asks if Sans even knows what he is doing, Sans Parton asks if the boy is threatening him. Our protagonist doesn't respond. Seeing such defiance, Xans grabs him by the head and remarks that the kid must have heard a thing or two from his older brothers. Then, he begins beating Ryun. As he does, he tells him that he should know when to keep his mouth shut, especially since his father and older brothers are nowhere to be found. Throughout the entire beating, our protagonist maintains the same gaze. He then asks Ryun if he knows how he ended up here. Xans Parton's tone turns mocking as he explains that Truno was the one who sold him out. He tells him that Ryun was used as a means of exchange for information about his older brothers. In other words, no one is coming to save him. Earlier, Ryun had asked what was going to happen next. Now, Xans declares war against the Sermon family. He adds that Ryun's kidnapping was only the beginning. Ryun simply lets out a chuckle for a moron. The guy sure talks a lot. And now Ryun is about to show him something. He isn't the one in danger. He is the danger. Meanwhile, Xans watches in shock as our protagonist activates healing magic. After healing himself, Ryun activates his magic circle, and judging by its appearance, our protagonist seems to be at the 6th circle. The next moment, Ryun thinks about how he has dreamed of this day ever since he returned to Duran. Meanwhile, Xans is still staring at the magic circle beneath his feet in shock. However, that shock quickly fades, replaced by fury. He scoffs that nothing happened, and wonders what kind of nonsense Ryun is trying to pull. Our protagonist simply smirks, reminding the idiot that he has already warned him he talks far too much. Just as Xans is about to laugh at him, another magic circle suddenly appears around his neck. As a result, he can no longer speak. His eyes widen in disbelief as he realizes that no sound will come out of his mouth. With a menacing look in his eyes, Ryun calmly explains that he used a silence magic circle, With his voice sealed, there is no way for Sans to cast any high-ranking magic because he can no longer chant his spells. Left with no other choice, Sans fires a firebolt, a spell that does not require chanting. Despite that, Royun only smirks. The spell is merely second circle magic and is nowhere near lethal. Not to mention he can tell that the boy has no intention of killing him. Sans cannot disobey his father's orders to keep Ryun alive. As expected, Sans aims the firebolt at Ryun's leg. He believes that if he only cripples him, his father will not scold him. But to his horror, Ryun resists the spell using his player system. Just as Sans prepares to launch another firebolt, this time using third circle magic, our protagonist shakes his head. Sans has already wasted his final chance. Suddenly, another magic circle appears around Zans's arm. Before he can react, Ryun activates a skill called Magic Disruption. It turns out that even a third circle spell, the level normally used by priests, can be disrupted by Ryun. Now pushed into a corner, Sans resorts to desperate measures and pulls out a dagger. But in the very next moment, our protagonist effortlessly shatters the chains restraining him. He explains to the stunned Sans that the binding magic was only second circle magic. Breaking free from something that weak is child's play for him. Before the boy can react, Ryan casts paralysis. Sans immediately collapses, completely unable to move. Ryan coldly tells him to save his strength because the roles have now been reversed. Later, Sans finally wakes up. Sans is stunned to find our protagonist, while Ryan mockingly asks if even Sans had enough time to rest. Looking around, Sans realizes that he is now chained in place. He instinctively tries to speak but suddenly pauses. His voice has returned, and the restraints are nothing more than ordinary chains with no mana binding them. In theory, he should be able to break free, but that thought vanishes almost instantly. The moment he tries to chant a spell, unbearable pain surges through his entire body. Watching him scream in agony, Royun chuckles and asks if he really thinks he is foolish enough not to prepare for something so obvious. Sans is left utterly confused. There's no magic circle preventing him from casting spells, so how is he being restrained from using magic? As if reading his mind, Ryan explains that capturing a mage is surprisingly easy. He then reveals that he drew the magic circle directly onto Zans's body. Horrified, Sans watches as Ryun tears open his shirt. This happens to be a forbidden technique. The moment the magic circle is inscribed onto the body, it automatically activates blood magic. Rune remembers this technique all too well because Sans used the exact same method on him in his previous life. The spell was specifically designed to keep him awake and prevent him from losing consciousness. Not only that, but Sans used the very same dagger he is holding now to carve the magic circle into the body of 12-year-old Ryan. Meanwhile, Sans desperately demands to know how Ryan is capable of using magic at all. According to the information he received, Ryun was supposed to be useless and completely incapable of wielding mana. Ryun simply smiles without answering. Thanks to the knowledge and experience he gained from his previous life in Adian, the moment he obtained mana, he immediately began making preparations. The very first skill he leveled up was Stealth. He explains that obtaining a skill is not difficult once someone understands its circuit. Every skill possesses its own unique circuit, almost like a blueprint. Once that structure is understood, mana can be applied to activate the skill. As one of Adian's greatest players, our protagonist has observed and mastered countless different skills. Now it becomes clear why he spent his days acting like a lazy bastard who refused to train. Aside from wanting the household to fall apart even faster, he had been secretly preparing everything behind the scenes. Using his stealth skill, he quietly slipped out of the mansion. He then came to this exact location long beforehand to deploy traps and made preparations. At that moment, Ryan remembers another technique that Sans used on him in his previous life. Even as Sans continues threatening him, Ryan proceeds without hesitation. This particular magic circle amplifies pain. At this point, it is already obvious what is about to happen. All of Zans's arrogance disappears as he begins begging for mercy. Surprisingly, Ryun agrees to stop for today and prepares to leave. However, instead of feeling grateful, Sans tells him to wait. He arrogantly claims that he is willing to give Ryun one last chance. Otherwise, once his family returns, they will undoubtedly kill him. Ryan immediately fires back, explaining that his family will not return for another week. Sans freezes in shock. That is because he personally instructed his subordinates to stay away for an entire week so he could enjoy torturing Ryun without interruption. When Sans insists that Ryun is lying, our protagonist points out the flaw in his logic. If Ryun truly knew his family's arrival time, why would he openly announce it? The smarter move would have been to keep quiet and catch him by surprise. Finally, Ryun reveals that he even knows about his family's secret agents, known as the Parton family fingers. Sans shouts that he is telling the truth. Before he can say anything else, Ryun immediately punches him in the face. Because of the pain amplification spell carved into his body, the impact becomes unbearable. Sans lets out a blood-curdling scream while our protagonist turns and walks away, promising that he will return the following day. For now, his real objective is to prepare for the arrival of the Parton family fingers, who will be coming in a week's time. Ryun reminds himself that these people are elite operatives, meaning he has to be extremely careful. One mistake could cost him everything. The story skips ahead by 1 week. As expected, the Parton family fingers finally arrive. The group immediately briefs their leader on the current situation. The man asks whether anyone has entered the dungeon. They explain that young Master Zans strictly forbade anyone from entering, so they have done nothing but guard the entrance. Hearing this, the man realizes that none of them know what has happened between Roan and Zans inside. Since the family head specifically ordered that Roan must be kept alive, he decides to enter the dungeon himself. After all, the family head's command takes priority over everyone else's, even that of a direct descendant. With that, the elite mage walks into the passage alone. Suddenly, he senses that something is off. Oddly enough, he cannot detect any mana. Then, in the very next instant, multiple magic circles suddenly appear above him. He has unknowingly triggered one of Ryan's traps. Reacting instantly, he casts a barrier spell to shield himself. The elite mage narrows his eyes. If there are traps here, then something must have gone terribly wrong with Zans. After activating a magic trap detection spell, he carefully studies the layout of the traps. He cannot help but admit that whoever set them is highly skilled. After raiding a second barrier for extra protection, he cautiously makes his way through the remaining traps, swearing that whoever dared oppose the Parton family will pay dearly. Moments later, Zans's cell door is blasted open. The mage is horrified to find the young master covered in blood and reduced to such a miserable state. After removing the chains restraining him, he kneels beside Zans and urgently demands to know what happened. However, Zans is far too weak to answer. The mage notices the magic circle engraved on Sans's wrist. From the mana flowing through it, he can tell that the spell was activated using Sans's own mana. That makes no sense. Completely baffled, he wonders what exactly happened here. When Zans desperately begs for a healing potion, the elite mage refuses. He insists that they must leave the dungeon first. Whoever is responsible may still be lurking nearby, and several traps remain active. Since Ryun was never taken away, the mage assumes he was never the enemy's true target. In his mind, Ryun is merely bait. Logically, abandoning him would be the safest choice. But doing so would mean failing the family head's mission, so that is not an option. Just then, Sans interrupts his thoughts. Gathering the last of his strength, he reveals that Ryun is the one responsible for everything. Naturally, the elite mage is stunned. If that is true, then he cannot afford to underestimate the boy. Without hesitation, he begins casting a seventh circle spell, intending to immobilize Ryun completely so that only he can move him. Unfortunately for him, the Ryun before him is only an illusion. The real Ryun is already behind him. Sensing danger, the mage instantly fires a fireball spell. A moment later, he realizes he attacked another illusion. Then, without warning, he coughs up a mouthful of blood. Something is wrong. Ryun confirms his suspicion. The moment the mage entered the dungeon, a restriction blocked his high-tier magic. Using it now will trigger severe backlash. Surrounded by countless images of Ryun, the mage grows furious. He scoffs that challenging a master illusionist with mere illusions is utterly foolish. With that, he unleashes an area of effect spell that wipes out every clone at once. At that exact moment, the real Ryun emerges from his blind spot and charges forward with a dagger. Seeing such a reckless attack, the mage becomes even more enraged. With a single kick, he sends Ryun flying across the room. Completely fed up, the mage decides to teach the boy a lesson. He plans to burn part of Ryun's face, confident that the family head will overlook such punishment as long as Ryun survives. Just as he is about to launch into a long explanation of why the Parton family fingers are considered elite, he suddenly notices something unusual. There is something wrong with the dagger Ryun used. In the very next moment, he receives an economy class ticket to the afterlife. The one who kills him is none other than his own young master. Unable to believe what he is seeing, the mage stares at Zans in shock. Zans simply sneers, mocking the man's pathetic arrogance. Except it is not really Zans. Our protagonist has used a soul transfer skill to possess Zans's body. The magic circle Ryun carved onto Zans was never meant solely to amplify pain. Hidden within it was a spell capable of transferring souls. Realizing the truth, the dying mage desperately attempts to drag Ryun down with him. The next instant, a massive explosion erupts inside the cell. After the explosion, our protagonist is the only one left standing. Without wasting any time, he walks over to the elite mage's corpse. Searching the body, he finds a healing potion. The moment he uses it on himself, the system responds by unlocking and increasing his pain resistance skill. Ryun lets out a relieved sigh, admitting that the whole ordeal hurt like hell. After all, for this plan to work, he first had to be injured by an archmage. Just as he is celebrating the death of a 7th circle mage, a system window suddenly appears before him. Ryun freezes in surprise. He stares at the notification in disbelief as it informs him that he has leveled up and completed a quest. Looking at his status, he sees that his level has jumped all the way to level 15. The sudden increase leaves him confused. The only explanation he can think of is that killing an archmage granted an enormous amount of experience, or perhaps there is another reason entirely. Regardless, he decides not to dwell on it and continues with his original plan. Ryun prepares to perform a ritual. He explains that if it succeeds, it will shorten his overall plan by an entire step. A skill circuit is engraved directly into a person's soul. Because of that, it does not matter what body he inhabits. As long as his soul remains the same, he can continue using the skills he mastered in Aeon. As for the ritual itself, Ryun intends to unlock new classes and jobs. Classes and jobs can be unlocked by sacrificing levels and fulfilling certain hidden requirements. Without hesitation, he sacrifices the necessary levels and unlocks the Assassin class, along with its hidden job, Shadow. The hidden requirements were to have at least 20 agility and 15 points in mana. Even after obtaining it, Ryun still has 10 levels remaining, enough to unlock another class. After sacrificing more levels and meeting the conditions, he unlocks the Necromancer class, together with its hidden job, Death Hand. With a few remaining levels, Ryan decides to attempt something even more ambitious. His true objective is a hidden job known as Ghost. This job can only be obtained by players who possess both the Assassin and Necromancer classes. He remembers that this very job was what allowed him to rise to the strongest rank back in Adaean. However, the true requirement has nothing to do with levels. It depends on the strength and capacity of one's soul. The process carries an extremely high chance of failure. Even so, Ryun never hesitates. The moment he begins, the system immediately warns him that his soul has been injured and requires time to recover. An unbearable pain spreads throughout his entire body. For a brief moment, Ryun wonders if achieving this hidden job is simply impossible. Then memories begin flooding back. He remembers every cruel experiment that was performed on him. He remembers every unbearable moment of agony he endured. Most of all, he remembers the deaths of Alejandro and Sena. He already knows exactly what will happen if he fails to obtain this class. Driven by those memories, Ryun refuses to give up. Even if the price is permanent damage to his own soul, he attempts the ritual once more. The process begins again. A progress window appears before him. Ryan silently stares at it, praying for the ritual to succeed. To his complete astonishment, the system announces that he has unlocked Phantom, an even higher hidden class than Ghost. Judging by the stunned expression on his face, this is the first time even he has seen such a result. Nevertheless, he has obtained everything he wanted, and even more. Now it is finally time to carry out his original plan. Since Phantom shares many similarities with Ghost, Ryun believes he can use its passive abilities to greatly enhance his necromancy. Under normal circumstances, he would never even consider attempting what comes next. After all, the minimum requirement for resurrection is level 70. However, because he possesses the corpse of a powerful archmage, he can temporarily bypass that restriction. With that, Ryun begins the ritual to create a lich. A moment later, the system displays a failure message. However, it also reports that the failed ritual has unexpectedly produced a special undead. Ryun watches as the archmage's corpse crumbles into countless dark particles. The swirling darkness gradually gathers together, slowly taking on a new form. To Ryun's surprise, his very first special creation is a female undead. The system panel confirms that the ritual was successful. It then prompts Ryun to give his newly created undead a name. Suddenly, the entire building explodes. The men standing outside stare at the blast in shock, wondering what could have caused such a massive explosion. More importantly, they are worried about their young master. As if on cue, Zan's, or rather Ryan at this point, steps out of the burning building while carrying his own body. Seeing the stunned expressions on their faces, he immediately pins everything on the elite mage, Ark. He calls them a bunch of fools, claiming that Arky betrayed him and nearly killed him. Gesturing at his battered condition, he says they should be able to tell how close he came to death. He explains that he only survived because he managed to seal Ark inside an artifact, but it will not be able to contain him for much longer. Mounting his horse, he tells the group that he is returning to the family estate and orders them to buy him as much time as possible. He promises that anyone who succeeds will be greatly rewarded, and that reinforcements will be sent. With that, he rides away. Later, at a military camp, a messenger delivers his report. Everything is reported directly to Lord Furies, the red-haired 7th Circle mage of the Parton family, who stands on the same level as Sena. Furious demands to know whether there is truly no trace of Ark, the elite mage, and one of the Parton family's fingers. The report crumples in his hand, as the messenger confirms there is none. The moment Furious asks whether they are the only ones aware of this information, one of the Parton family's fingers quietly approaches the messenger from behind. As soon as the messenger confirms it, he is killed instantly. Fieries calmly explains that the disappearance of their young master is already a serious matter. However, if it becomes known that one of the family's own fingers is responsible, the consequences will be far more troublesome. Just then, he hears a soldier shouting outside the camp. Stepping out of the tent, Furious sees one of his soldiers warning someone not to come any closer. The newcomer completely ignores the warning and keeps his eyes fixed on Furious. It is Alejandro. He calmly asks what will happen if he enters the camp. Furious warns him that trespassing into another noble house's territory without permission could spark a war. Alejandro immediately fires back, pointing out that the Parton family started everything in the first place before demanding they hand Ryun over. It turns out both men have arrived at the location where Ryun and Zan's were last seen. Pointing toward the destroyed building, Alejandro explains that 1 week after their protagonist's disappearance, they discovered the ruins. Worse still, the building contains a hidden underground facility, making the entire situation incredibly suspicious. Despite this, the Parton family has been doing everything possible to cover it up. Hearing this, Firas openly admits that they have no idea where Ryun is. More importantly, even their own young master has gone missing. The moment Firas suggests they cooperate, Alejandro immediately tells the bastard to shut up. Naturally, Firas is furious after hearing that. Alejandro declares that he will not tolerate any bastard interfering with the scene before he finishes his investigation. Almost instantly, both men release their overwhelming mana, each preparing to throw hands at any moment. Meanwhile, Truno watches everything from a safe distance, silently hoping the incident does not escalate into a full-scale battle. Sena furiously demands to know who gave Truno permission to run his mouth. The poor man immediately breaks into a cold sweat. Just as Zan's predicted, everyone now believes he is a traitor. Sena coldly tells Truno that the only reason he is still alive is because of the message Rion left behind. Because of that, she has no interest in hearing anything that is not directly related to finding Rion. Truno quickly explains that Rion mentioned leaving behind a trail as part of his plan. She asks whether such a thing is even possible in a place like this. Truno replies that if it had been that easy, the Parton family would have already found him. Even so, Ryan specifically stated that the only person capable of locating him would be someone familiar with the Sermon family's mana cultivation technique. Hearing this, Sena immediately activates the Blue Earth mana cultivation technique and begins searching for traces of his mana. Eventually she finds it. However, when they arrive at the location, Truno is completely stunned. Zan's body is hanging from a tree. He can only facepalm, while Sena is unsure whether she should be confused or impressed. Our protagonist has left two things behind. The first is a message revealing that Zanz is responsible for his kidnapping. The second is a handwritten letter. When Truno asks why they still have not found Ryun, Sena gestures for him to remain quiet. Opening the letter, she immediately realizes that only she can read it, as Ryun used the Sermon family's secret mana technique to write it. Our protagonist explains that he originally planned to destroy the Parton family from within. However, he fears that Zan's father, the family's 8th Circle mage, would eventually detect the soul transfer. Furthermore, if he returned to the Sermon estate while leaving Zan's unharmed body behind to be discovered, the Parton family would have a legitimate excuse to declare war. Since the Sermon family lacks the strength and resources to survive such a war, he decides on a third option instead. That is why he leaves this letter specifically for Sena, explaining both his plan and how she can eventually find him. Meanwhile, Truno anxiously asks what the letter says. Instead of answering, Sena simply burns the letter. She tells him they are returning to the Sermon estate. As the scene transitions, she admits that much work lies ahead. Inside a small town, a young boy runs through the busy streets. A passing merchant calls out to him, informing Leon that the guild leader is looking for him. Back in the forest, Truno is still desperately trying to understand everything that has happened. Sena, however, simply chuckles to herself in amazement. Lion is none other than our protagonist's new identity. Smiling faintly, Sena quietly remarks that calling him the Dragon of the Continent is no exaggeration. The next chapter opens 3 months later in Painton, the capital of the Painstroy Kingdom. Throughout the capital, news of the confrontation between the Sermon and Parton families has spread far and wide. What interests people the most is that the Sermon family received compensation from the Parton family, despite Rion still being missing after being kidnapped by a traitor from the Parton household. Everyone concludes that this can only mean one thing: the once powerful Sermon family is truly on the verge of collapse. The next scene takes us to the Painton branch of the Matron Assassin Guild. Even here, the Sermon family remains the center of discussion. Sapphire, a second-grade assassin and the branch manager, finds the topic incredibly boring. Still, she asks if that is all there is to report, prompting Dunn to reveal that Truno has been executed. He explains that Truno was found guilty of cooperating with the Parton family traitor and was personally beheaded by Alejandro. Sapphire nervously admits she has heard of Alejandro, adding that he is one of the few swordmasters on the entire Drea continent. At that moment, someone enters the guild. Our protagonist walks in, and Sapphire immediately welcomes him. Ryan nods before greeting both of them. Seeing that, Dunn quietly excuses himself and leaves the room. Once they are alone, Sapphire places a sealed letter on the table and asks if he knows what it is. The moment Ryan realizes it is a recommendation letter that would make him an official member of the guild, he immediately understands that there is a condition attached. She explains that the guild is one of the great assassin families, the 4th largest of them all. Because of this, a qualification test is mandatory. As for the group itself, it seems they're directly tied to the Parton family. She also admits that he is something of a prodigy, becoming the youngest assassin candidate in the guild's history. Ryan quickly downplays the compliment, saying he is nothing special compared to a certain second-grade assassin. Sapphire simply laughs, finding his modesty amusing. Even so, she remarks that Ryun has not changed at all since the day they first met. Her thoughts drift back to 2 months earlier, when a child who looked no different from a beggar walked into the guild. What shocked her the most was that the boy suddenly placed an enormous pile of gold coins on the counter. Even more unbelievable was the fact that he knew it was an assassin guild and immediately requested an assassination. Hearing that, Ryun jokingly says he heard the guild accepts any request, as long as enough money is involved. He even remembers how Sapphire treated him like an honored guest the moment she counted the gold. Sapphire shakes her head and tells him that the money was never the reason. She simply had a feeling that Ryun would become an important client someday. After all, Anyone would become interested in a child who walks into an assassin guild and places an assassination request on himself. Taking that as his cue to leave, Ryun picks up the sealed recommendation letter. As he heads for the door, he tells Sapphire to contact him once the preparations are complete. The instant the door closes behind him, a mysterious figure appears out of thin air. The man asks whether the good feeling Sapphire mentioned earlier is the real reason she accepted Ryan. She admits that it is only part of the reason before revealing something even more unbelievable. Ryan completed the guild's assassin training in just 1 month. A normal genius would require anywhere from 5 to 10 years to finish the same training. He did not simply break the record, he completely shattered it. Changing the subject, Sapphire asks the mysterious man whether he has finished investigating Ryun's new identity. It turns out the guild has been conducting a thorough background check, and from everything they have uncovered, Ryun's identity appears completely legitimate. The man explains that Ryan supposedly lived with a master who mysteriously disappeared. He believes that this is why Ryan joined the assassin guild to gain the resources and connections needed to search for his missing master. He confidently states that everything written in the report is true. He even reveals that he managed to locate the cabin where Ryan's supposed master once lived deep within the forest. There were recent signs of human activity both around and inside the cabin. For now, Sapphire decides to accept the report. However, another question suddenly crosses her mind. She asks whether Leon could actually be the missing Ryun from the Sermon family. Her reasoning is simple. The original Ryun disappeared, and around the exact same time Leon appeared out of nowhere. The coincidence bothers her. The investigator, however, quickly dismisses the possibility. According to his investigation, the original Ryun was a coward who never trained a single day in his life. Ironically, that very reputation works perfectly in our protagonist's favor. With absolute confidence, the man assures Sapphire that there is no chance the useless heir of the Sermon family could be the same person as Leon. He even offers to continue the investigation. Instead, Sapphire tears the report apart and tells him to drop the matter. In the end, they agree that if anything deserves further investigation, it should be Ryan's mysterious master instead. From his own room, Ryan quietly listens to every word of their conversation. They conclude that his master must have been an extraordinary individual to train someone with talent like his. Hearing that, Ryun admits Sapphire's instincts are surprisingly sharp. He explains that he is able to eavesdrop on their conversation through his necromancy skill. As long as a soul exists nearby, he can secretly listen to conversations without leaving even the slightest trace. Just then, Ryun opens his status window. The system displays his current stats along with both his active and inactive skills. As expected, the Archon Curse has now dropped to C rank. His level has also risen steadily over the past few months. As for the dramatic change in his appearance, he attributes it entirely to his body control skill, which has now reached B rank. Even a top-tier assassin like Sapphire failed to notice anything unusual, proving that his disguise has reached the point where he can deceive almost anyone. Ryun continues reflecting on everything that has happened, and eventually recalls the moment he created his special undead. Back in the Parton family dungeon, he gave the undead the name Kornak. The instant he did, the system displayed a strange interface. To his surprise, Kornak possessed a full status window just like a player. That immediately leads Ryun to conclude that Kornak is a growth-type undead. He wonders if this is one of the unique abilities granted by the hidden class known as Phantom. Just as he is about to examine Kornak's magic circuits more closely, another system window suddenly appears. His undead has received its own quest. Ryun is not particularly surprised. He already knows that certain hidden quests only appear after specific conditions have been fulfilled. Even so, he believes that Kornak is currently more of a burden than an asset since Kornak is sharing his experience. However, he is convinced that this will eventually change. He eagerly looks forward to the day Kornak grows stronger and reaches maturity. Back in the present, Dunn snaps Ryan out of his thoughts by asking whether he is worried about the difficulty of the upcoming examination. Smiling, Ryun replies that he was actually thinking about passing the test, becoming an official member of the guild, and someday even serving as its branch manager. Dunn laughs at the ambitious dream. Still, he never once doubts Ryun's talent or potential. Unfortunately, Ryun will not be taking the examination alone. He will be competing against 3 other candidates. Standing beneath the moonlight, the examiner calls each of them by name before announcing that this will be the final test to determine who earns the rank of 5th grade assassin. Only one of the 3 candidates will receive the opportunity to become an official member of the guild. However, before the exams officially begin, Dunn wants to know if the group knows anything about their target. Rip, the girl in the group, tells him that their target is Alok, a well-known merchant in the city who is in his 40s. The man has a mercenary group consisting of 3 people, 2 bronze-rank warriors and a silver-rank mage who protect him. The blonde-haired boy, Paula, adds that the man is very healthy and has even taken another young concubine. As expected of a healthy man, he visits the young concubine every day. Dunn is impressed. They manage to gather all that information using only the man's name. However, the moment he starts asking more specific questions, the group falls silent. Dunn explains that as assassins, they need to know everything about their target's security team and be prepared to take them down if necessary. After all, that is why they are being trained as assassins. He then explains the importance of gathering information. Turning to our protagonist, He asks what Ryan knows. Ryan simply replies by asking if he really needs to say it. That line immediately makes everyone look at him as if he is about to drop a serious bombshell. But to their surprise, Ruin wonders why he should share his information. After all, only one person can pass the exam. Naturally, Rip and Paula are annoyed by his response. They have already shared what they know about the target, so they feel it would be unfair for Ryun to keep his information to himself. Their anger only grows when Ryun calmly points out that the guild never trained them to be comrades. Dun cannot help but admit that our protagonist is correct. Regardless, after arguing among themselves, they decide to use the information they already have and proceed with the assassination. Meanwhile, Dun cannot help but feel impressed by Ryun. Our protagonist uses people and discards them without hesitation. Just like a true assassin, since the group has no further objections, they vanish the moment Dun gives them the signal to begin. Watching them leave, Dun admits that our protagonist has always been an interesting one. Dun remembers the first time he met Ryan. Back then, Sapphire had informed them about an assassination request. And when Dun discovered that Ryun himself was the target of the assassination request, he immediately wondered if the kid had lost his mind. The 4th and 3rd grade assassins believed that being given 3 days to complete the job was a joke. They were confident they could find our protagonist within 10 minutes. Unfortunately for them, the group only appeared 3 days later, battered and bruised. They admitted that Ryun was ridiculously tricky and that his traps were something else entirely. The deal was simple. If they failed to catch him, Ryun would personally train under Sapphire and Dun in the Special Assassin class. Anyway, Dun explains that becoming an official member of the Martin Assassin Guild is not easy. This time, Sapphire had specifically chosen the most difficult task in the guild's history. As he thinks about this, the scene transitions. Paula jumps out of a window from a building and lands on the ground. He believes he has successfully destroyed the alarm spell and disabled the mechanical traps. Although he manages to infiltrate the mansion, he never expects to encounter so many mercenaries. Now, the men are chasing him through the building. Rip watches from a corner as the mercenaries pursue Paula. She calls him sloppy but thanks him for creating a distraction. She admits that even if Paula had not been caught, she already had plans to make sure he was discovered. What she did not reveal during the test was that Alok had survived countless assassination attempts in the past. And whenever something like that happened, he always ran to the safest place he knew, his main wife's room. The woman naturally snaps at him. She could tolerate him bringing a concubine into the family, but bringing assassins into their home is completely unacceptable. Alok can only apologize and explain that it was not his fault that assassins had appeared. Meanwhile, Rip observes the two of them while forming a plan. She knows the other mercenaries are currently chasing Paula while only 3 soldiers are guarding the room. She is about to take them out first before killing Alok. But something causes her to pause in the middle of her action. For some reason, what seems like a normal argument between a married couple suddenly escalates. Alok's wife grabs a knife as she vents her anger about her husband's recent behavior with his concubine. She reveals that Alok has been taking money from her family to support the woman. Alok desperately tries to explain that the money was actually capital for his new business. However, his wife is far too furious to listen. She calls his explanation complete nonsense. And just like that, she kills her husband. Naturally, Rip is shocked. The woman's anger finally subsides as she stares at her husband's corpse. She wonders aloud what she has just done, and then she suddenly begins shouting. Rip has no idea what to make of the situation. The woman has just killed the very target she was supposed to assassinate, so Rip wonders whether the mission should be considered a success or a failure. However, what puzzles her the most is that she has not seen our protagonist since they left for the mission. At sunrise, Rip returns and reports that the mission was a failure. She is about to continue when Ryun suddenly appears and finishes her sentence. He points out that Alok was killed by his own wife. Rip finally takes a good look at him. She cannot understand how our protagonist is standing in front of her. She did not even remember seeing him enter Alok's mansion. Just then, Paula suddenly appears as well. He has barely managed to survive. Dun immediately asks him what happened. Paula explains that he does not understand what happened either. The mercenaries suddenly began fighting and killing one another. That was how he managed to escape. Hearing this, Dun applauds them. He then announces that the test is over. However, he adds that the test was not a failure. The reason is simple. Our protagonist is the one who passed the test. Everyone is confused. They have no idea how Ryun managed to accomplish that. Ryun calmly explains that he simply made Alok's own wife kill the target. Now, everyone is even more confused. They cannot understand how he managed to pull something like that off. Seeing their stunned expressions, Dun suggests that our protagonist explain everything himself. Both Paula and Rip are already expecting his usual response, asking if he really needs to explain, which is honestly becoming very frustrating and annoying to watch. But to their shock, he calmly says that he is going to explain. Ryan begins by saying that everything revolves around Alok and his wife. Paula frowns, unable to understand how this has anything to do with a domestic dispute. He wonders if Sapphire told Ryan about them before the test. Ryan explains that he only learned who their target was at the same time they did. Alok is already a famous merchant in the capital, and the information Paula and Rip gathered about him is indeed correct. However, Ryun points out that he was already far ahead of them. He had finished his investigation long before the test even began. Both Paula and Rip are stunned to hear that. Paula immediately becomes furious, pointing out that Ryun just admitted he learned about the target at the same time as everyone else. It makes no sense that he could have completed his investigation ahead of them. In response, Ryun explains that he never said he investigated only Alok. Instead, he had gathered information in advance on every famous person with enough enemies or questionable behavior to become a potential assassination target. He reminds them that he finished all of his training well ahead of schedule, so he spent the remaining time collecting information on anyone who might one day become a target. He even came up with assassination plans for every single one of them. In other words, our protagonist didn't just study the material that would be on the exam, he covered the entire syllabus and read the whole book before everyone else even opened the first chapter. Rune continues, explaining that Kelly, Alok's wife, deeply resented him for openly keeping a mistress. The first step of his plan was approaching Kelly while she was at her lowest and suggesting that she hire the Assassin Guild to deal with her husband. Judging by everyone's stunned expressions, absolutely no one saw that coming. Not even Dunn. Kelly had grown to hate the constant attention her husband gave his mistress. Worse still, she suspected he was using the money provided by her family to support the other woman. So Ryun instructed her to hire additional mercenaries while he created a situation where at the first sign of danger, her husband would instinctively run to her room, the safest place in the mansion. That would finally give Kelly the perfect opportunity to knock some sense into him. At the same time, the entire incident could be framed as the work of the mistress. Naturally, Alok would direct all of his anger toward the mistress. Originally, that was the full extent of Ryun's plan to help Kelly get what she wanted. However, the moment he learned that Alok was the guild's assassination target, he secretly sent Kelly a message confirming her suspicions that her husband had been using the funds her family provided for the business to lavish gifts on his new mistress. The group is left speechless, because that means the entire examination had been in Ryun's hands from the very beginning. Poor Paula realizes that, according to Ryun's explanation, he had been nothing more than a pawn in the entire plan. Even so, Dunn admits that he still cannot believe Kelly, an ordinary woman, would actually kill her own husband, no matter how much she hated him. Ryun simply smiles and says that he gave her a little push. He explains that he secretly mixed a potion into the liquor delivered to Alok's mansion. Fortunately, the potion took effect at exactly the right moment. Paula immediately understands. This explains why the mercenaries suddenly went berserk and started killing one another. Hearing that, Ryun admits they were never taught to be comrades, but he simply couldn't allow any of them to die. No one expects him to say something like that. Rip even blushes slightly after hearing those words. Still, Dunn points out that this is ultimately what allowed Kelly to kill her husband. Hearing the full explanation, both Rip and Paula congratulate Ryun for passing the test. But Dunn is caught completely off guard when Ryun tells him to expect even more payment from Kelly. The protagonist must be some kind of light Yagami or something. After manipulating Kelly into killing her own husband, she would naturally become terrified. To protect herself, she would do everything possible to cover up the incident and make it appear that professional assassins had carried out the job. In simple terms, Ryan secretly manipulated her into completing the very assassination she had hired the guild to perform. Rip can only think to herself that the guild didn't raise a child, they unleashed a monster, and she is more than happy to settle for second place. Suddenly, Dunn's expression turns serious as he tells Rip and Paula to return to the guild first. The two immediately leave. Now, alone with Ryun, Dunn asks if he realizes what he has done. He says Ryun has permanently scarred an innocent woman who simply hated her unfaithful husband. To Dunn, the Martin Assassin Guild exists to train assassins, not monsters. Rune merely shakes his head, as if Dunn understands nothing, and asks what makes him believe Kelly was ever innocent. In reality, every mistress Alok had ever taken had been murdered by Kelly. No one ever found out because her powerful family quietly covered everything up. Eventually, even Alok became wary of her, yet he continued taking new mistresses, fully aware that every single one of them would eventually be killed. Ryun explains that they are assassins. Whether Kelly is the one who ultimately killed her husband or not, the guild will still receive its payment. He adds that whether the target deserves to die, or whether the client is morally right or wrong, is none of an assassin's concern. In his eyes, they are paid to kill, so why should emotions or personal reasoning ever be involved? Meanwhile, Dunn can only stare at the absolute monster standing before him. He asks if Ryun truly believes assassins should have no conscience. Ryun calmly replies that it doesn't matter. Once someone requests a kill, an assassin's only responsibility is to complete the job. The next scene shows the protagonist receiving an official certificate, along with congratulations for becoming a certified assassin. Yep, he actually gets a certificate recognizing his qualification to kill people. As expected, the achievement causes him to level up. He also receives a bonus reward for earning Dunn's recognition, along with the acknowledgement of his comrades. Sapphire is about to assign him the rank of 5th grade assassin. The moment she begins explaining the requirements needed to qualify for 4th grade, Ryun cuts her off. To everyone's surprise, he calmly finishes her sentence himself. Sapphire is left speechless, as the protagonist accurately lists every possible requirement for promotion. After a brief silence, she admits that everything he said is correct. Ryun immediately follows up with another question. He asks how much the guild was paid for Alok's assassination. The surrounding assassins stare at him in disbelief and annoyance, wondering what in the world he is trying to do now. Sapphire, however, seems to understand where this is heading. Even so, she answers honestly, revealing the amount Kelly paid up front, the payment after the assassination was completed, and even the additional bonus she gave to cover up the incident. The moment she finishes speaking, Dunn immediately realizes Ryun's intention. A calculating expression appears on Ryun's face. Even though it was only a promotion test, he points out that he personally secured the client, successfully completed the assassination, and even earned the guild an extra bonus. Looking directly at Sapphire, he calmly declares that he has already fulfilled the requirements to become a 4th-grade assassin. Sapphire does everything she can to suppress her anger. Unfortunately for her, Ryun couldn't care less. He boldly demands his promotion. The instant those words leave his mouth, the entire room falls silent. Sapphire unintentionally releases her aura as she glares at him. Furiously, she asks whether he has become arrogant. Although she openly acknowledges his flawless performance during the examination, she reminds him that reaching 4th grade is no simple feat. He still needs experience. He still needs the recognition of his fellow assassins. According to her, his words are nothing more than an insult to every 4th-grade assassin who earned that title through years of hard work. Waving the matter aside, she suggests they simply forget the conversation ever happened. She says she'll pretend he never asked. To her complete shock, Ryun refuses to withdraw his request. Naturally, Sapphire's anger flares once again. She warns him that if he wants to survive within the guild, he needs to learn how to read the room. At that moment, Dunn steps forward. He proposes a better way to settle the matter. Sapphire allows him to speak. Dunn explains that, in his opinion, Ryun is more than qualified to take the 4th-grade promotion exam. He further adds that Ryun has no intention of belittling anyone. Instead, he has already demonstrated many of the qualities expected from a 4th-grade assassin. Sapphire remains skeptical but tells him to continue. Without missing a beat, Dunn starts making up a convincing argument on the spot. Palla and Rip both wear deadpan expressions. It is painfully obvious that Dunn is stretching the truth. Still, none of the other assassins can completely dismiss his words. After all, everyone remembers how Ryun shocked the entire guild from the moment he first arrived. His achievements alone speak for themselves. After giving it some thought, Sapphire finally agrees. However, she makes one thing perfectly clear. The 4th-grade promotion exam is nothing like the previous one. This time, Ryan will be risking his life. With that warning, the agreement is sealed with a handshake. Later, after the celebration, Dunn chuckles and tells Ryun that he has a remarkable talent for putting everyone around him on edge. Meanwhile, both Palla and Rip simply shrug. To them, Ryun acting this way is completely normal. After spending enough time around him, they've realized he always has a plan. At that moment, their drinks finally arrive. Everyone else is served beer. Meanwhile, Ryun casually takes his glass of milk. Seeing that, Dunn laughs before offering to personally train him for the upcoming promotion exam. To everyone's surprise, Ryun refuses. The group stares at him in disbelief as he calmly explains that he intends to rest until the day of the examination. The exam is still a few months away. During that time, Ryan announces that he plans to leave the guild for a while, a privilege reserved only for official members. Dunn sees no issue with the request, and Ryan promises that he will return in time for the exam. Leaning in closer, Dunn lowers his voice and quietly asks what Ryun plans to do after leaving the guild. The protagonist simply smirks as he wipes the milk from his lips, giving no answer. Even so, his comrades decide not to pry any further. Instead, they raise their glasses and insist that today is a day to celebrate Ryun's success. For tonight, they will drink to their heart's content.